Hello, 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 beautiful people. Welcome back to another episode of the USL Show. We are back with another conference preview episode. If you missed the Eastern Conference, hey, check out the full thing. Why don't you? But if you don't want to do that, we've already put into a nice little preview for you and each individual team's videos in a playlist on YouTube. So check that out. But first things first, let's say hello to the people. John, you look great in the not a polo LL Bean Portland Hearts of Pine kit.
I mean, man, this is a nice kit. Like, I'm not just saying that because they sent it to me. It's very comfortable, fits nicely. So, Portland just doing everything right.
You know, Kid Season has a episode on the Portland Hearts of Pine, and I went out there and said it. It's the most comfortable kit I own. It's super comfy.
For sure.
Ryan, how are you?
Doing well, yeah. Happy that warmer weather is at least finally coming to Charlotte. It's just been pleasant to walk outside and not have to wear a stocking cap on the walk to the train to work.
Fair enough. Phil, I'm pretty sure it doesn't get warm until like, I don't know, July up there.
It was 50 yesterday and today, and when I tell you I'm so back in the Midwest like vibe after 5 years that I was like, it's shorts weather, baby. Like we are fully back here in the Great Lakes at 50 degrees. The snow melted and now everything is just mud everywhere. So we are living.
I love that. Well, listen, we are going to hop straight into this because if you were here last week for the Eastern Conference preview, it does get long on us very quickly. So the way that this works is we go top to bottom. These are our personal rankings. Now, the fan rankings are going to be included on the graphic, but this is our personal rankings. Okay, so we're going to go top to bottom. Each team gets about 5 to 7 minutes. And this is going to be put at the front of every single video for each team. You know your team better than we do. You know your team better than we do. And if you think that we're wrong, A, tell us what we got wrong in the comments. B, go support your local content creators who are the ones telling you about your club. Support them. Support the ever-living crap out of them so they can tell us what we got wrong. So those are my two precursors before we get into this. Any thing from you guys before we hop on in?
No.
Nope.
You know your team's better than us, and also your team sucks. So like, and we're here to tell you, we're here to bring you back down to earth. So let's just I'm looking forward to this. Is the chaos? Like this, we're back to the simulation, baby. Like this is gonna be nonsense. So like everybody clip this because it's gonna make no sense when the standings actually shake out at the end of the year.
Speaking of those standings, here are the USL Show predicted standings. Number 1, your best of the West, Sacramento Republic, then Colorado Springs, New Mexico United, and Orange County SC, making up your home playoff teams. Teams who are making the playoffs at number 5, going down to 8, is Lexington, San Antonio, Phoenix, and Las Vegas. And missing the playoffs perpetually 8 or 9 is Oakland Roots, FC Tulsa, El Paso, and Monterey Bay. We have already talked pre-show. There is not a lot of consensus. There are teams in the top 4 that some of us did not have in the top 4. Some of us had a team in the top 4 missing the playoffs altogether. There are a lot of fluctuations that are happening here because the West is, of course, a simulation. But one of the teams that always seems to be consistent is Sacramento Republic, where they were rated by the fans as number 1, and they were rated by us at number 1. John, tell us, who did they gain? Who did they lose?
Yeah, I mean, on the loss side, you lose Kieran Phillips at the end of that loan. Defenders like Shane Wheat and Connor Donovan and Jonathan Ricketts are out. Kind of it in terms of the big losses right now. Well, Aldair Sanchez and Damia Villader as well. But then in terms of additions, a little bit quiet. Ryan Spalding coming in, Freddie Kleeman coming in, guys who know Neil Collins. And I think ultimately Neil Collins is kind of the big ticket addition for this club. So somewhat quiet, but I think if you're Sacramento, you trust him healthy Roro, see what happens.
Ryan, I'm just going to ask you because we do talk about the addition of Neil Collins, but it's not like they fired some bad coach. I mean, Mark Briggs is very highly regarded. Do you think it's going to make a big difference to the fans in what we're going to see, or is it really just a locker room thing?
I think it's going to be a little bit of both. Like, you appoint Neil Collins, who had a 55% win rate at Tampa Bay. He knows USL. He's very successful. The fact that Sacramento went all the way to Scotland to go hire him away and bring him back is proving that they're having trust in his project, that he knows this league. And I feel like it's a name that if you're in and around USL, it gets you excited about your team moving forward. Like, Sacramento on paper, we've always just said that they're one of the most talented teams, not just in the Western Conference, but in the entire league. When you add in a manager like Neil Collins coming in, it gets people excited, but it also raises the expectations of the team to perform to those expectations. And we're looking at a Republic team who finished 5th last year and exited the playoffs in the first round to Las Vegas, something that if you went back 5 years ago would have been unheard of to any Republic fans. So it's exciting that Neil Collins is here, but it also raises a lot of expectations with this team.
Phil, we talked about it already. This is a team that is mostly unchanged. But, you know, when you have a guy like Cicerone who gets hurt, that makes things hard. Roro Lopez gets hurt. That makes things hard. Jack Gurr gets hurt. That makes things really hard. Can they rest on a few auxiliary pieces in someone like a Spalding and Kleeman, who are very good in their own right, but compared to the rest of town on the pitch, auxiliary pieces? Or do you think they kind of fell behind the arms race in the West?
I do think that with the investment of going to get Neil Collins, I would have expected them to do a lot bigger business on the player, the playing staff front. That being said, when you do go down the list of Trevor Amon, Cicerone, Roro Lopez, Christian Pirano as depth, like, this is a team that has the firepower to compete right at the top of the West. Absolutely. I think that the depth issue is going to be like partially an issue for any team when you're talking about players of that quality and replacing them. But I think in general, this is a team that absolutely has the pieces to compete. But last year, they weren't able to consistently use their attacking pieces in a way that exploited like what I thought was a massive advantage. And it will be up to Neil Collins to figure out not just how do I get this like defensive unit to be healthy and cohesive and operating at the top like they were much of last year, but how do you get these attacking pieces who we know can be dominant in the league? How do I get them all firing and get them into the team in a way that emphasizes all of their strengths? So I think if anyone can figure it out, it's Neil Collins, and that's why you see the fans and our show give a vote of confidence to this team.
John, this is, for the show rankings and the fan rankings, personally, my most overrated team. I had them finishing 5th again. And a lot of it comes down to Donovan and Wheat. Those are two really good center backs. And Kleeman is good, but I don't have him in the same just tier as someone like a Connor Donovan, right? You lose, you're just kind of losing a couple of these players that are just so solid defensively. And I don't know if Neil Collins is going to get necessarily more out of this attacking front three than Mark Briggs did. What am I getting wrong?
I think if you look at the first 10 games of last season when Roro was healthy, this club was, I think, getting 7 more shots per game than their opposition, like absolutely boat racing the Western Conference, elite offensively. Yes, it's a risk to say someone like Roro, who's honestly getting close to 40 at this point, is going to come back from a serious injury and be the same player. But you've got Pirano. I've got Nick Ross as a backup, even though he starts no matter what. Like, that guy is going to be a contributor. Jack Gurr healthy after missing the end of last season. This team has the chance to get better in a meaningful way, attacking wise. And while Sacramento put up a great record defensively last season, they actually gave up the most fast break XG out of any team that wasn't Miami. So you look at someone like Donovan and someone like Wheat, who are great defenders when they're in their block, but maybe didn't quite have the athleticism to do what was required. I think Spalding fits the bill at the wingback spot. Kleeman, while he's not going to win a foot race against a lot of players, he's a little bit more of an upgrade on Donovan. You think about some of those aspects, and I think the balance is right for what Collins is going to want out of this team.
Ryan, we are kind of looking at a lot of just kind of schedule watch, figure out what's going on here. And you recently put out an article that was basically the 5-game stretch that will define each team's season. And I want to know, what is the stretch for Sacramento? Because especially for everything in the West that we talked about pre-show that is so jumbled and close, what's going to define it for them?
I recall from my article, I almost said it was cliche to say that these first 5 games for Neil Collins is going to define it. And it's simply because of the opponents that they've drawn, and that their first 3 home games are against New Mexico, Colorado Springs, and Louisville. We've already mentioned Louisville, who as highly ranked as they were in our Eastern Conference ratings, and we'll get to Colorado Springs and New Mexico subsequently here. But then you also have the trip to Orange County to finish off that 5-game stretch that I think we'll know for real if Sacramento is the Sacramento of old, if they can get through these 5 games and be firing on all cylinders, be looking like the team that we remember them as. But if they get through these 5 games and they've taken 2-3 defeats and it's a slower start, I feel like there's going to be a lot more pressure that's going to be thrown at this team, that even though they'll have an easier quote unquote stretch after these 5 games, you really start behind the 8 ball if you don't kind of come out really fast as the Sacramento team did, going 11 games unbeaten to begin last season.
Any final thoughts on Sacramento before we move on? All right. Let's go number 2 to your reigning USL champions, the Colorado Switchbacks, where a lot of the guys that you love, they are back. John, tell us about them.
Well, a lot of guys that you love are gone as well, with Speedy Williams, Ronaldo Damas, Dylan Spierre, Jairo Henriquez, Tyreek McGee. Those were all vital players in the playoff push. Lots of good additions at the same time. Akeem Ward, kind of the headliner. Marco Nicoletto coming over from New Mexico. Matt Real coming back on a permanent deal. Isaiah Foster returning after a spell away. And a couple of attacking players with some MLS DNA, and Levante Johnson and Anthony Fontana. It's a deep looking team, even if it's a little different than it was during the playoff run.
Phil, I'm going to go ahead and start with you for this, where, I mean, I do think the headlining loss is going to be the guy up top in Ronaldo Damas. But Damas, while a double-digit goal scorer for them, wasn't exactly the biggest impact piece on the planet. Do you think they are going to be missing him as badly, I think, as a lot of people think that they will be?
So I think the question is always, when you have a focal point like Ronaldo Damas, how do you can do the money ball, right? Of we can recreate him in the aggregate. Hanya, Tejada, Micheletto, and Johnson do feel like, hey, we can probably recreate the output. It's just a question of, in practice, will Tejada be enough of a focal point of the attack to not let them get bogged down, especially against teams who want to sit in and counter? When Damas is so dynamic and so able to stretch defenses, make those runs that create spaces for other people, I think they will be really reliant on these wide areas. In particular, Real, Akeem Ward, and then Hanya and Johnson, either side of that. These wide attacks are going to be key. And you almost look to a person like Justin Dillon off the bench as a focal point late in games when they're trying to break teams down. So on paper, I think it makes sense. I really love the Marco Micheletto signing. I thought that was really good. That being said, to say that they won't miss Damas is probably way overlooking just how important Ronaldo can be to a team. But they've certainly got enough here to where I think they can fight at the top of the West. They've got a solid spine in this team for sure.
Ryan, this is not just fighting for the top of the West. This is fighting for a back-to-back champion whom we have not had in a a long, long time. The last back-to-back was Louisville City and Speedy Williams, whom they lost. With the talent they have on the field, what do you think the chances are realistically for this Switchbacks team to go back-to-back?
As we'll discuss in kind of the rest of this episode, the Western Conference is chaotic. And for a team that went through the route that they took to get to the postseason, to get to the final from last season and eventually win it, I felt like Colorado Springs kind of really embodied that kind of chaoticness to get there. I mean, they were the number 2 seed team from last season. They got through Orange County, they got through Las Vegas. They're both teams who had to take upsets to get to where they were in that round. So I do believe that that Phil had mentioned that we're going to see this kind of chaotic randomness that the Western Conference is going to be kind of trademark known for this year could play into Colorado Springs' favor. However, knowing that the history of that for as long and that it's been since the last time we had a team repeat as champions, it does feel like at some point when you get to the playoffs that it relies a little bit on luck, and the luck may kind of run out this year. I do at least want to bring up with Colorado Springs, I do find it interesting just having the new ownership group come in. I'm curious how that may impact any of their spending or how they may approach the team this year as well.
Yeah, John, listen, there's a lot of good players on this team. That's such an understatement to say the least. And when you look at Ward and Real, I mean, Ward had a conversation to being kind of the crown jewel of that Memphis team when they did go under. How big is it for Colorado Springs to pick up Ward?
I mean, I think he's a fascinating addition because not only for my taste is he the best one-on-one defensive fullback in the USL, he's somebody who's got the versatility to play on that right side or play at left back. And it kind of made it hard when I was trying to come up with this lineup, right? Ward has been a left back for a couple of years, but you've got Matt Real, who was so good in the postseason. You've got Isaiah Foster coming back. And I think that speaks to the strength that Ward has. Like if you're putting him at left back, he's capable of getting upfield, finding his right foot and cutting upside. He's equally solid on his more natural sideline on the right. So I think getting that presence into the back line, and a back line that was already pretty excellent last season, is something that's going to be useful for Colorado Springs. Like quite often they just put Aiden Rocha there, who's a good player, but doesn't have that offensive verve that Ward brings to the table. Given the fact that there's a lot of changes further upfield, I think having Akeem Ward there who can come in and be a steadying presence from the jump is going to be big.
One thing I'm just going to throw out there, the addition of Abraham Romero in goal for a loan. Christian Herrera is awesome, and he was my personal MVP of the playoffs. It was ridiculous the run that
he didn't miss a single minute all of last season.
Romero's not bad though. If you remember him from his Las Vegas Lights days, this is yes, Lights, but also like he was a shining spot of that team. He is a good player. I can't help but wonder if this is something like if he is just going to be like a cup guy for a Jägermeister US Open Cup, or if he is going to get like legit minutes to try to fight it out with Herrera. I'd be intrigued. So
this is not specifically about this season, but I think it's like worth mentioning that Switchbacks are going to be a very, very serious organization going forward too. Like the ownership change is one thing, but to go out and get Brad Estes as well, like to be the president of the organization, like real statement of intent from Switchbacks. So looking forward to how they build on. I don't think this year is even necessarily like their final form, if you will. Like it feels like there's a lot more to come for Colorado Springs, which is very exciting for them.
Any final thoughts on Colorado Springs? All right. Let's go to New Mexico United, where we have them in third. The fans have them in third. This was the only unanimous pick for the USL show. Everyone had them in third. This is intriguing because they lose a lot of amazing players, but they bring in one of the superstar coaches in Richard Sanchez. Who do they bring in? Who they lose? And does that even out, John?
Dennis Sanchez also.
Dennis
Richard
said, that's a
Sanchez.
Richard Sanchez? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Who is Richard
He's
Sanchez?
the San Antonio goalkeeper. which
Oh,
we'll
that's
get
right.
to.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
Sorry, Dennis Sanchez.
No, you're good. Yeah, I mean, Sanchez kind of losing a lot of the midfield here with Sergio Rivas, Nicky Hernandez, Husu Landry / Nanan Husu, whatever he goes by these days, and then Marco Micheletto out, as well as Avion Flanagan at fullback. Lots of interesting names coming in. Luis Fernando in the attacking line, Mackenzie Gaines with some MLS experience as well. Tomas Pondeca coming in on loan from North Texas. And then I think the showstopper has to be Gideon Zelalem.
So, Ryan, with this being Dennis Sanchez's first year in New Mexico, after losing a coach that ends up going to FC Dallas like we all thought he would, granted, I thought that was going to happen like 6 months before. I don't know. Do you think that this New Mexico team is going to kind of keep the same identity that they did before? Or do you think they're going to take a little bit of that Las Vegas Lights kind of flair with them down to Albuquerque?
Yeah, I talked about it in my first or the most crucial 5 games for New Mexico. And I had said for Dennis Sanchez, it is basically showing to the New Mexico fan base, one of the best fan bases in USL, that I am the guy. Hey, we won the regular season title for the Western Conference from last season, and I'm going to continue doing that. I have our rivalry games against Sacramento or against El Paso in our first 5 games. I play Las Vegas in the first 5 games as well. I'm going to prove that I'm the person to lead this team back to the promised land and go further than we did last year in the postseason. I feel like the signings of Mackenzie Gaines is exciting. You have Marlon and Vargas on the wing. And yeah, I mean, I guess the ex-Arsenal player Zeline is also very exciting. But no, for real, this is a New Mexico United organization that knows how to run a proper football club. They're one of the best run organizations in the Western Conference. And to go out and get Dennis Sanchez is to really kind of go all in on this season and say, we're going to make it to the final this year.
You know, Phil, obviously there's a couple more signings that are allegedly still to be made, especially appointing that right back position, apparently, where Will Seymour has been in the league for a long time, like a really long time. If people don't remember, if I have this right in my head, like Will Seymour was the guy that was beating out Alphonso Davies at Vancouver. He was the reason that Davies wasn't playing, which always interesting to see that kind of lineage to go through. But what do you think of this roster? Because a lot of the best players are gone. Do you think they've earned this 3rd spot with what's on paper right now?
It's really weird. I would say my vote, putting them as high as I did, is as much a vote of confidence in Dennis Sanchez managing this as it is the names on the page. I would say this is maybe the opposite of Lexington, where I'm the names to me actually don't add up to a top 4 team in the West. When you look across, you're there are some really talented players here. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to rag on them. I just mean that we have a lot of players that were fine, and good performers, solid performers. I think we have seen players struggle to make the League One jump in the past. They got over the hump a little bit with that last year, with the introductions of Akale. And so I think in general, Dennis Sanchez is really the person who needs to be able to get this to gel. There is a thing from last year where they sort of overperformed winning the West, and I think they'll have to continue that overperformance a bit to end up in this place. The thing is if anyone's going to get that overperformance, it feels like it would be Sanchez. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it all works. I think the concern from me as a not as a New Mexico fan, obviously, but just if I were a New Mexico fan, my concern is at the number 9, because Hurst has his moments. Not really having another option up top is because Daniel Bruce is a striker in name only. He's not a traditional number 9. So I think Hurst really firing is going to be big. He had obviously, like, I think he's a very hot, cold player. So keeping him hot for longer than he's cold is going to be really important.
John, speaking of Hurst, that is the way I was going to ask you about, because last year, I think a lot of us saw him play against Pittsburgh, and he had the goal immediately where he goes through on goal and he kind of fumbles it a little bit. He goes out wide, he's not quite on frame. And the year before, he probably would have put it side netting and they just kind of missed the chance, but he scores. And it seemed like it really pushed him onward. Did you see a change in Hurst from when he was in League One to now, to, in that time in between, where it felt like he is back to his old League One self? Or is there a place for concern for New Mexico?
I think Greg Hurst is at his best when he's involved in the game a little bit more. I think when he's had stops that are less successful, or seasons even in New Mexico where he's less successful, he feels a little bit isolated as the striker. He's not involved in feeling like he's a part of the system. That was a real feature of the Eric Quill system, was getting him those touches. And obviously, Dennis Sanchez, the way that his teams are so dominant possessively, that ought to be a feature of this team again. I really kind of see him almost in that Corey Bennett mold of, yes, he's leading the line, but there will be some hold-up play. And I think another feature of Hurst is that half of his goals were on his left foot and half were on his right foot last season. Like, this is a guy who knows how to finish in a number of ways. He can be the really useful player that helps this team maybe scrape out those late results that we saw quite often last season.
Any final thoughts on New Mexico United?
Miquel Ayakala is the truth. That's my final thought.
I think he's going to get sold for big money.
The way he took the step up in the playoffs last year, I would not be surprised.
I said it on Twitter, and I think Blue Sky during the playoffs, he seems like a guy who's destined to be in Birmingham in about 6 years.
Yeah.
So, all right. Number 4 and number 5 in the fan rankings, Orange County SC, where they have made some additions. Oh boy, have they made some additions. John, tell us about them.
Yeah, I mean, we do have to start with the negative. Owen Lamb got sold. Dylan Powers and Marcus Nakeem are gone. Other than that, I mean, like said, the Kasipli retiring, but it's not a huge overhaul. The additions, especially up front, are crazy. Tristan Traeger coming in at a forward spot. Chris Heggert re-signing permanently. Ryan McKinnon, obviously, after winning the League One Golden Boot, is here. Some changes further back with Usman Silla in the midfield, who could be a good one to add. And then Tom Brewitt, the headliner, into the back line.
Listen, Ryan, this is on paper a great team, right? But last year, this was a team that kind of started off a little bit shaky. I mean, the start of their season had Colin Shuttler scoring a goal to, do this, to like get a draw against Sacramento. But then it was a little bit shaky. And there was like a nice defensive thing about them that kind of reminded you of their playoff run. And then they were starting to get some goals. What do you think is the difference in that team to now that is getting such a high ranking as 4th from us and 5th from the fans?
I really have to say it's down to just the signings that they've made. I mean, we've mentioned Liam McKinnon and Tristan Traeger, Chris Heggert as well, but this was an Orange County team who had a negative goal differential in the Western Conference from last season with just 38 goals on the year, yet they ended the season with 8 matches unbeaten as they went into to end the regular season, and then only to lose to the eventual league champions Colorado Springs in the playoffs. This was an Orange County team that felt like they had a lot of momentum kind of to end the year and to go into this offseason and make the splash signings that they did. It really puts like a lot of hope back into the fan base that they will just kind of continue on with this momentum into this 2025 season.
Phil, there's a lot of players that we can look at, and I want to kind of look at the best person to wear the number 2, Mr. Duty himself, and we have McKinnon and Traeger. Like, these are really, really good players. Is that enough to really get them over the hump to get them back to their championship winning form?
So I think it's going to take Tristan Traeger, because Tristan Traeger is a fantastic player. He's been a solid piece across a lot of different teams, and his best ever goal return in a season is 8. So like, I think in terms of output, the expectation for Mr. Traeger is going to be a lot higher this season. And that's just the reality. Like, if you're going to lead the line like this, then you've got to have the output. That being said, McKinnon scored obviously a boatload of goals in League One last year. So he's got the supporting cast around him to be able to like maybe take the pressure off a little bit. But I think it's important that Traeger has like a volume year for Orange County if they want to be this high. I think it's hard to look past the signings that they made. They have gotten significantly better across the team. And I don't think it's insignificant that, you know, with a full offseason, Danny Stone, like, does he really put his stamp on things and become the coach that I think a lot of people thought he would be when Phoenix originally signed him up, right? So that'll be the question mark. But I do think I think the signings are very good, and there's a couple of players who are going to have to make a step to a different level, like if they're going to be really, really top contenders in the West.
John, when I was looking at this team, I was looking at a back line that I liked. I was looking at a midfield that I also like. Kyle Scott getting a lot of love in the chat. You bring in a Tristan Traeger, bring him home to Orange County, and then I see McKinnon, and I'm thinking that in my brain this is just Olowski 2.0, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have them as the best team in the West right now. Talk me off of my cliff because I think so highly of them.
I mean, I've got them number 2, so it's not like I'm far behind you. I think the thing for me is finding the chemistry in the attacking sense. Like, we've seen a lot of good players come up from League One. Not all of them recreate their form in the same way. While I really believe that McKinnon has the potential to be awesome in the championship and get an MLS move, that's not a guarantee. In terms of the striker spot, there's a real chance that it's Ethan Zubak, who got 10 goals in the regular season last year. And where does that put Traeger? Is he playing on the right, but you want to have Bryce Jamison in the shop window? It's an interesting balance to strike. They're lacking in terms of a defensive midfielder right now. Like, Kevin Partita is there, but he's had some injury troubles the last couple of seasons. Kyle Scott, as tremendous as he is with the ball, doesn't really give that for you. The center back group is thin. Like, if you look at Ashton Miles, he's 20 years old. He's great, but he's 20. Tom Brewitt hasn't been in the league in a couple of seasons, and his experience came with bad Hartford teams. Again, a player I like on paper and I like according to the stat line, but how is he going to mesh with the young kid next to him? There are question marks in terms of the balance through the spine of this team that personally I think Danny Stone is going to figure it out. But if things go wrong, like, we're going to understand what the issues were from the moment we're talking about it right now.
Ryan, you're my schedule guy. When does Orange County go back to Phoenix?
Orange County will first play Phoenix on July 30, or sorry, we'll play them on June 7th. That's when they will make a return.
Circle that one. Because that will be fun. All right. Any final thoughts on on Orange County? No. Okay. Talk about the biggest gap here. Well, I guess kind of second biggest win. The fans think that Lexington is the 9th best team in the USL West, but we as a group have them as 5th. John, who they add? Actually, do we even want to say who all they added?
I was going to say, how many hours do you need to list the incoming?
I think they've actually signed 25 players, but I might be wrong on that. But I mean, the losses are what they are. Like, this team was garbage in League One, so we don't really need to spend time there. But you think about like Speedy Williams coming into the midfield. I think Kendall Burks and Joe Hafferty are big additions at the back. Logan Ketterer, a familiar face for Phil, in goal there. The attacking group is interesting at a minimum. Lots of kind of younger, high talent guys. I think of Alfredo Medence, the reigning League One Young Player of the Year, Elliot Goldthorpe, who was killer in Next Pro, and then Marcus Epps making his way over to Lexington. So tons of interesting pieces here.
Phil, I want to go ahead and start with you on this one, where for all intents and purposes, and I'm going to say this, I know that Lexington was in League One last year. They did have a team. By all intents and purposes, this is an expansion club. Like, they are starting clean over with like 1-2 guys that were on the team last year and 0 guys from their inaugural season. Because of the loan that they had today, there is nobody left from their inaugural season. How long is it going to take them for them to gel? Because last year it took a while and it never happened until they decided to beat the crap out of Fuego for no good reason. What do we have?
It's a good question. I mean, I think when you look across this team, the other question mark that I have in terms of building chemistry is you have some guys who have been, I don't know this for certain, but guys who have been maybe issues like at other teams. And I think we've run across this before where like in building, I think it was Hartford last year, right? Where it was like,
Yeah,
we had a lot of guys where it was like great players and they've had some like issues gelling in the past. I do think that could be a hurdle, like a big hurdle for this Lexington squad. That said, like the names on the page, very, very good. I do have I love Logan Ketterer. He is like 3 years removed from his last like actual competitive soccer, like in any sort of like consistent way. So I think that'll be a little bit of a battle, but the pieces here, I think Sofian Jafal is one of my favorite midfielders in the league. And he is a very mercurial character as well. So he's one of the guys that I look to where it's like, if he's happy and things are ticking, then like, I think this Lexington team can be extremely dangerous. Like they've got tons of even just looking at this chart, you can tell that they've got more depth than basically anyone else in the league, right? They've got a huge roster. And like we've seen, in maybe outside of USL, very high profile case, Chelsea, it doesn't always mean that it's going to work. So I just think they have to settle on a first or a best 11 very quickly to try to build some chemistry and consistency among those players. Because if it's going to be like you're chopping and changing every single game, then I think it's mid-season and we're like, hey, what's wrong with Lexington?
Ryan, I'm so glad that Phil brought up the depth here because Lexington is the farthest east team in the West. There are more Western teams than Lexington that are in the East. And when you add on top of the fact that they are doing the U.S. Open Cup, they are doing the Jägermeister Cup, and they're having to do all the extra travel, how important is this depth for them? Because they're going to have to be doing more than anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, they've really taken the Dallas Cowboys and the NFC East approach to their conference alignment. I mean, the one thing that you're going to look at, and I had circled it in my at least the 5-game preview, but there's a stretch in July and August where they have to play Phoenix, Miami, Sacramento, and Colorado Springs all on the road consecutively. Those are some brutal travel away days that will rack up a lot of frequent flyer miles, but it's part of why you have a huge roster like this where people are going to be tired. You're going to be traversing all major time zones of the United States this season. It's one of the most brutal entries into USL Championship that a team could possibly be given. But the other comparison you're going to make is going to see from when North Carolina FC made the jump from League One to the Championship. They were still a playoff team. They barely snuck into the playoffs for the Eastern Conference last year. So it shows that an expansion team, quote unquote, can do that if they make it into the Western Conference playoffs, which is where we have them ranked.
John, the story of this team unfortunately begins with last season, right? Where they were horrifically bad. And at least one time a week we would say, haha, what's going on with Lexington? Or it's time to just make fun of Lexington. It was a weekly occurrence for us. Is it time for us just to kind of wash the past away?
100%. I think in terms of, I mean, the most obvious change they made that I forgot to mention was dumping Darren Powell, kind of moving him into the front office and bringing in Terry Boss, who, while he hasn't really had a ton of head coaching experience in the professional ranks, was an absolute dominant manager with Oregon State and the NCAA. And not somebody who just excelled with player development, but had real modern progressive ideas for how he wanted to play, like constantly shifting formations, constantly pressing high and trying to possess the ball and control territory. That's such a distinction from Darren Powell. Like, it's hard to describe the difference. There are some different decision makers behind the scenes as well on the sporting side. This feels like a Lexington team that understood we've got to raise the level, not only on the pitch, but in terms of the people who are making the calls and decide what's going on. And I think that's why I feel like this is a promising team. Even if it takes a couple weeks to decide this is the best 11, these are the guys we're going with, that's going to end up being a fruitful process in the end, because I believe, at least, in the vision that they've got going on.
Any kind of final thoughts for Lexington?
Well, go for it.
No, yeah, go ahead.
I saw the shout in the chat about Elliot Goldthorpe, and I wanted to say that he's got to have the craziest career trajectory of maybe any like player. If you go to his transfer market and look at that transfer history from Bradford City to Sunderland to Farsley Celtic to ODU to Hofstra to Des Moines Menace on to then Vancouver Whitecaps last year. Madness. But like, last season was basically his first like serious professional, like serious minutes in professional football. He had 14 goal involvements in 22 games. Like, he is very serious. Can he make the jump from Next Pro to the championship? That remains to be seen. But I wanted to address the shout in the chat in that crazy work history. Please explain this gap in your resume, but also, but also had a wonderful season last year for Whitecaps too. So,
yeah, I was going to point out the Epps thing of he's been getting the minutes at right wing back for most of this preseason. One of my favorites. Like, I really just like watching the guy play a lot. But that's it's a spot that requires a lot of defensive responsibility out of him. He's capable. He's a player who kind of relishes the physicality of the game. But I don't know. Does Lucas Stouffer maybe take that job at some point during the season?
All right. Next club up. And for us, they are number 6. And with the fans, they tied for 6th, which how that many people answered a Google form and somehow you people tied is ridiculous. I even put it through a spreadsheet and did the equals average just to make sure. It's not just me bad at math, it's Google too. This is a team that got rid of their coach in Marcina. The mentality monsters are dead, but a lot of them have kind of stuck around. John, who's here, who's gone?
I mean, yeah, Alan Marcina out, Carlos Lamosa in, Kevon Lambert gone, Carter Manley retired. Lots of kind of those loanies like Hugo Mbonge, Jesus Brigado are gone. Kendall McIntosh and Pablo Cisniega from net out. So lots of changes, especially at the back for San Antonio. But you think about the additions. Alex Cornale coming in, Alexis Wahi in the back line as well. Diego Pacheco was kind of a later addition on the wing, but one I'm excited about. A handful of players who are a little bit of a mystery coming from Lamosa's native Colombia. But I'm thinking Almir Soto at least is the starter at the 6th spot. So an interesting team.
Yeah, Ryan, this is a team that went through a lot of changes and had a lot of issues off the pitch last year. Nothing like really, really bad, but the fans in the front office had like a giant disconnect. And it seems like this season they are already kind of, fixing some wrongs, if you will. What are you kind of expecting from this team in starting off this new era?
Yeah, I mean, this is a San Antonio team that's 3 years removed from winning the league to now missing the playoffs in what was a a very competitive playoff race in the Western Conference last year. It really felt like this year is a make or break type of season for the fan base, for the front office, just from being on the same page, and for this team just being a competitive outfit that it felt like the front office was compelled to go out and make a new hire at head coach, to go out and sign these players like you mentioned, Cronulla, hey, as well, Soto as well, that it seems like this is a San Antonio team that it's a playoffs or bust mentality for this season. And I think especially important is to start off the year on the right foot. I mean, you're playing Monterey Bay, Pittsburgh, Oakland, Lexington in your first 4 games, that if you lose to Lexington in your first 4 games, I feel like it would be respectable, but it wouldn't do as well to win the fan base back if you have a team that comes up from League One and basically beat you in a match. So that from San Antonio's perspective, they really have to make a first impression here, because those are really going to count in winning the fan base back over.
Phil, how do you feel knowing that San Antonio paid $800 million for number 6? Anyway, Juan Soto joke. With this team,
Oh my god, that was a thinker.
yeah,
Yeah.
whatever. This is a team that did bring back a lot of pieces that we know, right? I mean, Jorge Hernandez was the best midfielder in the league last year. Conversation there. You have Jake LaCava, who seems to just kind of go around the entire league, but is always just a stud wherever he goes. Mitchell Tainer is a guy who arguably should have won MVP in 2022. You bring back a Juan Agudelo, which we know his pedigree, and that's a lot of sameness. Are those guys going to be able to elevate their game around the guys that they brought in? Or are they going to be the remnants of an old era that kind of frankly got old and hurt?
Yeah, it is a little bit strange, especially when you look statistically at the San Antonio's team last season and the fact that like Agudelo is the top scorer, but like their second top scorer is Lucho Solaniak, who is retired, and maybe didn't even get that many significant minutes like towards the end of the season. I think they had like serious dysfunction despite looking individually good, if that makes sense. I think your mention of Jorge Hernandez is spot on in the sense that like extremely talented, and for whatever reason he reminds me of like Bruno Fernandes in this Man United side, where it's like clearly a good player in like a team that just doesn't work for whatever reason. I think San Antonio needed the change in the manager spot to be able to unlock whatever dysfunction was going on like up top. And I think when you look at the pieces, like this has the potential to be a very, very dangerous team. The question is just like how much are they going to hit the ground running and how much time are they going to spend figuring it out? I would say like across the history of the USL Championship, it is a very mixed bag when you like bring in players from abroad. Not to say that they can't succeed, because there have been plenty of players who have had like wonderful careers in USL coming from abroad, and they are a bit of an unknown quantity because the relative comparison of competition is really hard to actually judge, and how they're going to cope with the physicality of the league and the travel and all of these things that make the USL so unique. So I think those are the pitfalls for San Antonio. I think it's impossible to deny that this is a team that they have plenty of talented pieces. And I think like a lot of teams in the West, the question mark is like, is the new manager going to be able to get them together and actually make something of it?
John, when I'm looking at this team right now, I am seeing a guy who used to play for my club, which is Alex Cronulla. And I am seeing someone who might be the next best thing to a Mahoney on the other side, Tainer. Are they going to be able to kind of rekindle that defensive stoutness that they had? Obviously, that was a 3-5-man back line. This is like that 4-5-1. But is that defensive solidity in those center backs going to be able to keep them afloat while the attack kind of figures it out?
100%. And I think that it's kind of the unity of the system from front to back. When San Antonio was under Alan Marcina last season and really struggled, there was a real disconnect between we're lumping it long every time, we're never able to establish territory, the defense is constantly under fire. This feels like in Tainer and Crognale, you've got two players who are excellent center backs and can clean up defensively, but both of them are decent in terms of their initiation. Given how San Antonio is going to adapt under Lamosa, they're not going to be as direct a team. It's impossible, frankly, to be as direct as whatever Alan Marcina was trying to run last season. So if you let them kind of get engaged in the game, slow down the tempo so you're not constantly turning it over and putting yourself under fire, I think that's going to help the cause already. And when you've got players as talented as Tainer and Crognale and Alexis Swahi, who's been eating up some minutes in the preseason, that's going to be a great defensive unit.
Any kind of final thoughts on this team?
Congrats to San Antonio FC on winning the preseason Copa Tejas by defeating Locomotive in a friendly.
Congratulations.
Yeah, but if El Paso doesn't tweet about the friendly, did it really happen?
Exactly. That's yeah.
Just, I mean, if we're talking about like downgrades, and I feel like it does need to be mentioned, going from McIntosh to Sanchez might be one of the biggest positional downgrades we're going to see in any of these teams.
I've historically been way too mean to Richard Sanchez, so I was holding my tongue. But yeah, I'm very concerned about the goalkeeper spot for this team.
Richard Sanchez, the New Mexico manager?
Richard Sanchez, questionable goalkeeper, unquestionable mustache.
There we go. I was hoping you were going there.
And that's all I have to say about San Antonio. So let's go on to Phoenix Rising, where we have them 7th. The fans tied for 6th. Again, how did you mean this many people vote on this and tie? I don't understand. John, there's been some changes here, but a lot of faces that stayed the same. Who's in, who's out?
Well, Paul Mudoka is in on the sideline as the new manager here. You lose Rocco Rios Novo, Renzo Zambrano's gone, then Fuenmayor and Lawrence Wyke are out from the back line. And it has been a lot of signings in Phoenix. I think Damian Rivera is a big one out on the wing. A couple of MLS Next Pro guys, whether it's Nobo Okello in the central midfield, Carl Saint, a familiar name to some USL fans, coming in on loan. I think Tristan Henry could be a difference maker in goal. But, I mean, if you're looking at the depth chart, it's a lot of new names in Phoenix.
So, Ryan, this is a team that made the playoffs. If you kind of heard the way that Phoenix fans talked about this team, you thought they came in last. But there was, again, some disconnect between the front office and the fans. Do you think they are going to make the playoffs again and ownership kind of make right of some wrongs? Or do you think that this is going to be a subpar season from the Rising?
Yeah, I found it interesting that the two clubs in the Western Conference that we felt like had a large disconnect between the front office and the fan base, and especially evident in the results on the pitch, were tied in our fan rankings and we're right next to each other in our USL show rankings. Kind of shows that both teams are entering this year kind of with something to prove. And I feel like with Phoenix appointing Pa Maduka as their next manager is a step in the right direction. We saw how successful he was with Pacific FC in the Canadian Premier League. He won 52% of his games with North Texas in MLS Next Pro, and he was a very quality assistant coach for Charlotte FC. I feel like having someone like him at the helm is enough to get those results from a Phoenix Rising team who finished last season and with not 6 defeats in their last 9 games that still managed to sneak into the playoffs. But it was a team that was hurting for consistent results week in and week out, that if you just start stringing together some of these points on the board, I feel like there is enough here that they can get into the playoffs, but I wouldn't count on them being a home playoff team.
Phil, I'm looking at this team on paper, and there's a name that is listed as a depth piece that I feel like has to find a way onto the pitch, and that is Formella, where, you know, he was the guy for Oakland, and then everything fell apart after he was sent to Phoenix. And he's still a good player. Was last year a bit of a down year? I think so. But how much of that was not really a lot of playing to his strengths? If you were to try to get him into the team because he's still quality, who do you put him in over?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because it does feel like, I don't know, Formella feels almost like left over in a weird way, where the mentality of the club and sort of their whole strategy when it comes to like who they signed and all these things, it's like they've obviously focused a lot on like MLS Next Pro and like young players, and it does feel like Formella is gonna kind of, I don't know, I think he's gonna be probably a bit player like compared to what we're used to. He's 29 in a team of like, I don't know, I almost picture like the Will Smith Fresh Prince meme of like in the flower costume, like he's with a bunch of kids. To me, he does feel almost like a holdover from like a bygone era of Phoenix, that like he's sticking around because he is still a quality pro and like he is going to be able to contribute, especially off the bench. But I don't know that he like sees many like starting minutes given the presence of Cabral now full time. I think Margaritha has been mentioned in the chat and is like obviously was a huge like reason why they were even relevant towards the end of last season. And with Rivera like coming in, I don't know that there's necessarily the room in this team for Darius Formella that there probably was when they were figuring out, hey, who are we? It feels like Phoenix is saying like we are a young team that is gonna like lean on these young attackers to bring us where we want to go.
We kind of mentioned the 2023 team and that kind of era. Did y'all realize that Darnell King was brought in to be a coach at Phoenix?
Yes.
Okay. I saw that today when I was looking through things. I just did not
They cut to
that.
him on the sidelines like quite a bit last season, to the point where it like became notable to me, just like as a, you know, the deal if you like watch a team a lot and you just have weird shit that you keep picking up on.
Yeah.
See, I never listen to broadcasts. I just have them on, but I don't listen to them. So
Well,
I just saw him.
Yeah.
I just saw them and I just never realized it was him. But yeah, I did not realize that Darnell King was assistant coach.
Legend. Love Darnell King.
I also love Darnell King. John, we said we were going to have a conversation about this. I said this team is going to be a contender in the West. Keep in mind that meant I had them as fourth. I like what I kind of see with this back line. I do like Quayshow. Every time I do think about him, I think about that mental penalty he took in the final, and that is just my lasting image of him, but it's fine. Mama Traore is a fantastic player when he is running right. Marboy I love that guy. I think he's going to be sold for big money. And then you see a Colin Smith who has the potential but hasn't quite gotten it out of him. But then, like Paul Maraka, he seems like a guy who could get it out of him. And all those things that I wanted to see out of Smith, I'm thinking that Cobb maybe can. Am I looking at too much potential upside versus what's currently there?
I think if you look at Traore and Pop Marboy, that's an unassailable elite center back group. Like there's no two ways around it. And then if one of them gets injured, if Pop Marboy gets sold, the depth is really bad. I think the way that Ka is going to set up this team, given what we saw with him, both in the Canadian Premiership and with North Texas, is a rather aggressive press on the wings. And say Damian Rivera or Gerald Margaritha gets beat, suddenly that's like Emil Cuejo in a one-on-one, or that's Colin Smith in a one-on-one. You need the help from the midfield. It feels like Phoenix, because of the way that they really hang their hat on being a high possession team and a pressing team, comes in with principles that don't always match perfectly to what they've got on the field. So given that, given the depth, given the fact that this is just a young team that might take some time to gel together, I think Phoenix is going to be more of a bubble team than a legitimate contender by the season's end.
Gotcha. Any final thoughts from y'all? All right. Let's go ahead and go to the 8th and 8th, where this was picked before one Johnny Rodriguez was announced to be joined the team via transfer. This is a team that has a lot of great things going for it, but the coach, that is not Richard Sanchez, but Dennis Sanchez, is now gone. John, who else did they lose?
I do just have to say, like, hiring Antonio Nocerino continues to be one of the wildest things that happened this offseason. But this team lost JC Ngando, Grayson Duty, and Usman Jabong at the end of MLS loans. Corey Bennett and Joe Hafferty were sold for club record transfer fees on back-to-back days. They brought in a couple of interesting players, Johnny Rodriguez chief amongst them, honestly. Knight Pickering is a name people know. Yunus Boudadi came in late as a kind of preseason trialist. A lot of MLS Next Pro college grad type kids who could end up being good, but are a bit of a question mark. Of that group, Patrick Leal stands out in the midfield, and then Turner Humphrey was a champ with North Texas last year.
Where it was in the chat of club record transfers, where Las Vegas did have 2 club record transfers in a row. And Rodriguez was a club record transfer for Oakland. We'll talk about that later. This is a team that is fascinating to me, Phil, because you see players from last year that you learned to love. You see Noel, and you know Knight from his time with Memphis and the U.S. Youth National Team. You see Smart, who's probably going to be going over to Europe sooner rather than later. Nigro is great. Arozarena really came into his own. Adams is fantastic in his own right. Is it going to work under Nocerino?
I guess that's the question. Like, I mean, if Dennis Sanchez was the coach of this team, I think you would literally have, like, we'd be talking about this as one of like the best teams in the West. And that, so the question mark is basically Antonio Nocerino with a serious squad. And I think we do have to take this seriously. Like I know we've all rated them, you know, on the bubble, all of that stuff, but I do think, like, expectation wise, this team should make the playoffs. Like off the back of the names on the roster, and the presence of one player in particular, Coleman Gannon. If Coleman Gannon is not in the playoffs again, I will riot. So no, I think really it has put a lot of weight on Nocerino, and the fact that, you know, him proving that he was like just saddled with a Miami team that was an anchor around his neck. Because if this Lights team like is slow out of the blocks, I would say that like all of the heat is going to go right to Nocerino pretty quickly.
Ryan, this is a team that was on the come up last year. They really showed up and showed out. They proved everything that you could of, if you invest, the wins will come. They were the poster child of put money into your club. Are they going to be able to continue that growth?
Yeah, I mean, they really struck it like an unexpected route to the Western Conference Final that we saw from last season. I know a few of us had predicted them to at least advance as far once we got to the playoffs, but like in preseason, we were not like having any expectations for this Lights team. But then they had a really fantastic season from last year, and it really just felt like something that they're trying to build off of, which is why the Nocerino hire makes it all the more kind of baffling. But the fact that they had the 2 club record outgoing transfers and then turn that into Johnny Rodriguez proves that they're willing to go out and spend. That I feel like this is a team that really does have high expectations this year. And if like going back to what Phil says, if we're going to compare it to other teams in Europe, this really feels like a Julian Lopetegui at West Ham type of situation where on paper, that's a very talented squad that should be at least top half, but for whatever reason, it didn't work under Lopetegui. And it really kind of puts the onus on Nocerino to make this work early and quickly, or else it's going to be kind of looking at the question marks. And one of the things they luckily have to open the year is a lot of home games like Tampa Bay, New Mexico, Orange County, Tulsa, Loudoun, and Colorado Springs to all open the years at home. So it really just kind of has to be, how does this team come out of the gates, and are they going to be quality enough to kind of repeat from last season?
You know, Bill, you kind of brought up the Will Smith in a flower costume. The entire time I've been thinking about Nocerino joining Las Vegas and not bringing any of the young Italian kids to Las Vegas with him. The entire time I'm just kind of thinking of that scene with Will Smith when he's just like, how come he don't want me, man?
All the Italian kids just at the bus. They're hanging out in the living room of whatever shared mansion they're living in of Ricardo Silva's.
Do you think he's still going to wear the bib every time?
He's
No
got
way,
to.
right?
He's got
He's
to.
gotta.
It's as iconic now as Ryan Martin's golf hat, like out in Loudoun. It is just part of him now.
John, this is where I'm going to just kind of ask the question where you have Noel, you have Rodriguez, and you have Knight all up top. How do you fit all those guys on the pitch? Because those are three starters that honestly should be playing day in, day out, at least from my.
Knight Pickering isn't. I mean, in terms of preseason minutes, in terms of what he got in Memphis, maybe he can become one. And I think before the news today, that was kind of the big question of Las Vegas will go as far as his development can take them. Given Johnny Rodriguez in the mix, I think he's mostly going to be backup minutes again. And I agree with you that like the potential is there. This is somebody who has shown flashes. As you're nailed down number 9, maybe not. But it's part of kind of the consensus, or rather like the idea that this team is going to be young. They're going to rotate quite a bit. There are going to be opportunities for some of these players to get real minutes in meaningful games. And it would be easy to imagine. Maybe Nocerino decides Noel is going to play back in the midfield and we're going to go with 2 proper number 9s. That would be the easy route to get Rodriguez paired with Knight and see what happens. And frankly, I think that's a possibility because we don't know much about Nocerino's style. Like, there were no lessons to take away from that Miami team, just given how bad they were and how undermanned they were. So it's going to be really kind of interesting to see what Las Vegas looks like when they hit the pitch. And how does the philosophy change? Or is he just kind of copy pasting what Dennis Sanchez laid down?
I guess this is just kind of a question for the group. Is this Las Vegas Lights team the most interesting team across the USL Championship and League One?
It's certainly never been quiet off the pitch.
Lexington is probably
that was my answer. Yeah,
like up there. But I mean, I would say like Vegas games are going to be box office for sure.
Okay. All right. Any final thoughts on this Lights team?
I just shout out to the Monterey Bay fans in the chat who are saying that Vegas is aspirational, because can you imagine anybody wishing they were Vegas like 2 years ago? And now it's like, true. Man, if only we could be Vegas. That's crazy. Shout out to the Lights, and shout out to Jose Bautista for changing the trajectory of that organization.
We'll just have to see if Nocerino is still in charge for when Las Vegas hosts the Miami FC on September 13th.
My Super Bowl.
All right, let's go on to the first team missing the playoffs, where the fans before Johnny Rodriguez
this is crazy.
Had them 4th. Oakland fans. Hey, you guys are a passionate bunch. We love you for that.
Absolutely.
But we had them 9th before the Johnny Rodriguez news. Other than Johnny Rodriguez, John, who'd they gain, who'd they lose?
So initially, it seemed like the losses were Memo Diaz, Niall Logue, Paul Blanchett. And then it's kind of later cuts of Machine Nadir, Sherry, and Dom Dwyer, which like you understood that was kind of just attrition over the offseason. Then last week, Rafael Baca got cut after being probably their best creator in the midfield. Then today, Johnny Rodriguez got sold. In their place, Kai Green coming back home, Tyler Gibson there for some veteran presence in the midfield. Kendall McIntosh is going to be the number one between the sticks. Panos Amanakis was a genuinely gigantic signing when they inked him a couple weeks back. Some depth at wing back as well with Abdi Mohammed and Jurgen Damm coming in. But yeah, hard not to feel negative after the trajectory of things recently.
Phil, you are somebody, you and John were able to go out to Oakland. You saw the passion. They are doing a lot to fill Oakland Coliseum. They are going to be the first game back in Oakland Coliseum since the A's left. It's bound to be, a raucous atmosphere to at least the opening game. Is there any world where they can put on a show in their very first match?
I mean, I think like this is a talented team like that has some very interesting pieces. I think like going out and signing Panos was obviously like at first it was like, whoa, Oakland's like making some big statements. Jurgen Damm, like obviously another big one. That being said, like, is it enough? I mean, to John's point, like it just feels like maybe they have added and subtracted and maybe they kind of land back where they are. The reality of the Roots is that it is an extremely well-run organization. And like, I think they'll do everything to be Oakland's team in the aftermath of like the A's leaving. Obviously, Oakland's been hit with all of these relocations and Roots are well-positioned to be the community's club going forward. And I think we saw, me and John saw firsthand, like just how deep that goes. Not to make too many Roots puns, but it is very much a community asset that I think will take good care of the community and be a part of that community, like very intentionally. Will it be enough like for them to be a serious contender in the West? Like, it remains to be seen. I think it's a little bit too much of it's going to have to be the Panos show, like in attack. And which, we've seen it done to varying degrees of success.
We've seen it done with Manuel Arriaga and Danny Trejo next to him.
Right. And that's where, because it was like sort of the Loudon, it's more of the, like, is this going to be more of a Phoenix or more of a Loudon? And that's really the question mark. I think it's maybe leaning on him a little too hard to count on him to be the fireworks for this Roots team.
Ryan, like I've already talked about, this is a team that is going to be Oakland's team. We've talked about all that. We are going to see a passionate fan base. And this is also a team that always seems to manage to sneak its way into the playoffs almost every single year. I said it in our opening, but perpetually 8th and 9th. That is just kind of where they end up. We obviously gave them a 9th ranking before Johnny Rodriguez was gone. Do you see a world where they can make it into the playoffs?
Yeah, you talk about their home schedule, and their first home game is against San Antonio, which I think is it's going to be an interesting contest. It'll be about the third week into the season because they'll have 2 games under their belt against Orange County and against Monterey Bay, 2 teams that are at opposite ends of our predicted tables right now to really kind of gauge where this team is. But they need a result against San Antonio in that first home opener, not just for the confidence of the crowd, but for us to just kind of see, are they kind of on the better half of the bubble, or are they still kind of be fighting below the playoff line for a lot of the year? This was an Oakland team that throughout all of last season, you would get their stretches of going 5 games unbeaten late in the year, only to follow that up with going 6 matches without a win. Also very late in the year, kind of in that crucial playoff push that if you lose a player like Johnny Rodriguez in this squad, you're going to have to try and find and make up a lot of these results elsewhere. And if we're going to mention other really crucial games on the schedule, is just right after their home opener on March 29th is the Oakland Roots hosting Las Vegas, just for the two city rivalries that we've talked about.
I mean, yeah, you almost called them Las Vegas, which would have been just absolutely nasty work by you, but it's fine. John, listen, this is a Panos pod. We do love Panos, but we are looking at this back line. That's what we're trying to see that can really carry them in. Neville Hackshaw is great when he's not away on international duty, and he is getting up there in age. Kai Green was great, but what can he give us? And this is where I always get really scared. Mark Velashi.
Just call him Gagi. Everyone just calls him Gagi.
Gagi?
Yeah.
That's so much easier. Okay.
His first name. Yeah.
Gagi. I'm doing that because that's a long name and it scares me. And then, this is a Camden Riley pod. Everybody knows this. We love Camden Riley.
Guest of the show, Camden Riley.
Guest of the show. And then McIntosh, and it's kind of hard to say this because Blanchett was so good for so long. But with the way it ended, McIntosh is an upgrade. Is this defense enough to get them into the playoffs?
I mean, no. The defense is going to be decent. It is definitely not enough to carry this team over the line. I think we saw in a number of games, I want to say that the Roots gave up 5 goals 4 different times last season. There's just something about this team where when it starts to go wrong, it can really pile up. And they've not addressed that issue in terms of the personnel who are going to be running the system at the back. In fact, you could reasonably argue that losing Memo Diaz and replacing them with old man Jurgen Damm at this point is a meaningful downgrade in terms of the back 5. Maybe if they had a Johnny Rodriguez type, you could say the defense does enough and we've got our striker. I don't know if anyone knows anything about Peter Wilson, but he was most recently playing in the Norwegian 3rd tier and was signed to be their number 1 striker. So, yeah, I mean, it's interesting times for the Roots. I would love to be wrong. I really want to see them build the momentum at the Coliseum. But this team looks rough right now.
Any final thoughts on the Roots?
I just think, a Paul Blanchettless Roots just feels so weird because since they joined the championship, he's been ever present. So yeah, it'll be very, very strange to see the next era in goal for the Roots.
But they did bring in an Oakland native, which is always cool. Always a good place to do that. I mean, again, they, like you've mentioned, they are like truly rooted in Oakland. They have really committed to it more so than a lot of teams in the USL. And New Mexico and Detroit City are my like golden children for making your roots in your city. So more teams should be like those clubs. All right, moving on. One that I was intrigued by, which is FC Tulsa coming in 10th all the way around, where you look at the names on the paper and you see real improvements. And this is a team that ended up being pretty decently hot to end the season. John, who'd they gain, who'd they lose?
Yeah, I mean, minor change on the sideline with Mario Sanchez, I believe, becoming the technical director as Luke Spencer takes over the full job. Lots of lone guys on the outs, but you're losing Diego Pacheco on the wing, Rashid Teddy and Bradley Bourgeois in the back line, as well as Alexis Swahi. And then, honestly, that's kind of it. Like, not a ton of major players outside of the center back group have left. They signed Khalil El-Medkar while the playoffs were still going on, which I think is a statement of intent of its own sorts. Lamar Batista, Delance Pierre, and AB Sissoko reforming in central defense. Stefan Lukic coming in from, I believe, Chattanooga last season. And then Taylor Calhera, who, if he didn't win the Golden Boot, he was in the mix with NYCFC too, and going to be a big addition up top.
Ryan, we kind of talked during our Crest tier list, and we said that this is one of the more successful rebrands that we have had in the USL in recent years. On the pitch, you are also missing a lot of names that you have grown to really love. in Tulsa. A lot of names. This is truly a new era for FC Tulsa. How do you think it gets on this year?
Well, I do at least want to give a shout out to a Football Manager 2018 player I had on my Venice FC squad, Harvey St. Clair, for still being here, and also another
Chelsea
Phil
brought
reference
up,
to
yeah.
having a very weird career path to get to Tulsa. But yeah, I feel like Tulsa in this 10 spot ranking is very much kind of a product of what we've seen from the squad from the last 3 seasons. They've not made the playoffs in the league since 2021, and yeah, well, the crest rebrand has gone well. It doesn't really stick in a lot of people's minds unless your team is playing Tulsa that week. That just not qualifying for the playoffs for that long, it really kind of like you tend to fly under the radar. You don't get as many coverage from a wider kind of league audience from fans watching the teams every week. So I feel like, as I had mentioned in the article I wrote, that this does kind of feel like a make or break season for Tulsa moving forward. They really need to kind of state their intent to just get into the playoffs, just to kind of let people know it's like, hey, we're still here.
Phil, I'm looking again at this back line because really when we start talking about these teams toward the bottom, most of the time they're at the bottom because their attack isn't amazing, right? There's not many teams at the bottom that have a great attack but no defense, right? So when you're looking back there, you see Rogers, who is amazing. You see Sissoko, who is pretty good. Like he showed flashes. He showed those flashes in Memphis and Tacoma ? You have Batista, who famously got that 25-day contract, scored 2 bangers, and then just refused to elaborate further. And then like Dom and Segrist are very good players. To me, this feels like a step up when you compare it to the Oakland Roots back line. Is this enough to carry them into the playoffs?
I think if they are healthy, they are pretty good. I think the loss of Bourgeois is like one that flies under the radar for me in terms of this dude made 150 appearances for Tulsa. Like he's been there since they were the Roughnecks. Like he's like foundational to the team, and I think like the loss of him you do lose a bit of like leadership. And for me, the guy who was toughest to play against in Tulsa's backline last year, like not just a good personality guy, but a guy that is like absolutely hell to play against. I think with that said, like we saw the flashes, like you said, from Bautista. Sissoko is solid. Like he was solid in Memphis, but I think Memphis were again like hot and cold and like went through these patches where they weren't very good defensively. And Rogers was best in a no-co team that like allowed him to fly up the wing and do his thing, like in assisting Trevor Amon. So I just say, I don't know. I'm not like 100% sold. I feel like they've got so many guys up and down this team where it was like, if you could take clips of last year and convince somebody who, you know, has no concept of USL that these were some of like the best players on the best team in the league. And it came so infrequently that it was just impossible to actually put together like any sort of consistent performance. So I think that's the question mark for me, is they've got a lot of these guys where it's like, you can see that they've got some talent, but they were never able to consistently apply it. And that's why Tulsa ends up towards the bottom, because the inconsistency just seems to be king around there.
John, I'm looking at this front line here, and you see El Medcar, you see a clear / Stojanovic, you see a St. Clair / Lukic. I can convince myself of all those players. What am I missing?
I think the thing that's kind of given me pause with this unit right now is that it's a little bit imbalanced. Like El Madkar is somebody who's going to be constantly making those moves into the channels, trying to pick up the ball and create with the ball at his feet. St. Clair is very much a wide player at heart. Like he's somebody who wants to be hugging the sideline, whipping crosses in, almost in a way that doesn't feel complimentary to Arthur Rogers when he's on the overlap. You throw in Calhera, who's somebody who scored a lot of goals in Next Pro, but also took, I think, almost 70 touches a game and was hyper involved in terms of possession in the final third. There's a little bit of like oil and water with the way that this team has been assembled up front. That's not to say it won't work, but I think that Luke Spencer is going to have to experiment a little bit. And you think about someone like a Faisal Batash, who I've got as the number 10. He can play out wide. Lukic is good on either wing. Owen Dahm played a little bit of left winger last season. So again, this is another club, as has been the case with a lot of the West, where you really like the names on the team sheet, but they're not going to end up looking like the thing I'm coming up with right now as they kind of figure out the chemistry, figure out who plays best with one another.
Any final thoughts on Tulsa?
Check out Backheeled in 2 days from now, where I've got a piece where I interviewed Caleb Sewell.
Love that. Check it out. Former Memphis VP, right?
That's right.
Cool. Moving on. El Paso, where we have them as 11th. The fans have them 12th. John, who's in? Who's out for the Locomotive?
The Locomotive actually lost a ton of guys they had like a lot of loans from, what was it, Juarez, I think? Eda Borelli and Yuma also retired. Joaquin Rivas out. Ricardo Zacharias out. Willow Baccagnoti back in Miami. Miles Lyons and Nick Hines gone. I'm going to shut up now because that's too many names. But you do look at them bringing in Memo Diaz at fullback. Also Alvaro Quezada and Gabi Torres at fullback. Some midfield help with Frank De Roma and Kofi Twomesi. And then Frank Lopez and Beto Avila, kind of the big names up top.
John, I'm actually going to kick it straight back to you because
we're saving the big man for last year. Yeah.
Well, that, and also you're the one that's high on this team.
That's right.
I want to get the positives out of the way before we eventually go to Phil, which is bound to be doom and gloom.
Look, I understand the doubt. Like, you look at that striker spot, and that is a whole lot of nothing. And that's with respect to Frank Lopez, who's good for 8 goals a season or so. But there was something about the way that Wilmer Cabrera was able to organize this team late in 2024. And the Locomotive weren't plowing over teams, but the form they put up late in the season was good enough to be in the playoff mix. Returning the core that put that together, whether it's Ricky Ruiz and Coronado, who came in late, someone like a Palermo Ortiz, who I thought was pretty excellent in the back line. That's a standard. That's a baseline of being okay at a minimum. Memo Diaz, I think, is a pretty transformational player. So if you can get the contributions at the number 9, if the defense holds, I think El Paso is going to be in the mix. And just given the fact that I don't trust more than half of the West at this point, why can't they be a playoff team?
Ryan, this has been a team that has been in borderline free fall since Lowry left. There's a whole lot there that you can talk about with just kind of distrust from fans to front office. Again, kind of the story of a lot of teams out in the West right now. Is there a world for you that things kind of turn around? And if so, what steps do you think have to be made by the club to regain the trust?
Yeah, they've brought in Wilmer Cabrera, who, say what you will about his second stint at RGV, but his first stint, he won nearly half the games that he was there with. And John, you had mentioned their at least good start or good finish to the end of last season. Out of their final 14 games played, they only had 4 defeats in that time. So there was at least a stability that they gained as the 2024 kind of drew to a close. I know the season kind of was what it was when it got to that point, but El Paso having the stability of having Cabrera through the offseason to try and just provide a little bit of calmness to the team, I feel like is something that's going to go a long ways. One thing that they're probably going to have to need to start this upcoming year is patience, because you draw Colorado Springs, Phoenix, New Mexico as your first 3 games. That's a very tough opening slate, but there are going to be patches in this year where they can find those results there where, and like John has mentioned, the West is chaotic enough that any kind of random team is able to move up. Like, we didn't think Las Vegas last year was going to be in the position that they were as well. So, why not El Paso?
Phil, I'm not going to just completely let you cook. I'm going to give you some kind of, because the last, I want to have some positive thoughts before it eventually
Sure.
turns. I like Ruiz and Diaz on the wing backs. I know last year it was, wing backs go forward, they don't come back. But, I do like what they have to give. Dollemeyer, I think, is a really, really good center back. Jamali Waite is a fantastic goalkeeper. And I can talk myself into Cavallo and oh my gosh, Coronado. There we go. Those are players I can really talk myself into. And then the question is like, is a Lopez going to work? Is a Moshabane going to work? Is a Moreno going to work? There's a real upside with this team.
Yeah, no, I think there are players like you said, like Jamali Waite returning to this team was probably the shock of the season. Like I had zero hope that Jamali Waite would be back after the absolute shooting gallery that he oversaw like last year. And he had a high profile like stint in the Gold Cup. It's like there's no way this guy is coming back. The fact he is a big win for the team, absolutely. I don't know if he's coming back because he's like, maybe I'll also win Save of the Week every single week and like and be able to build my profile even more. But no, a few of the things that you mentioned, like I think the weight is definitely on Amano Moreno and Tumi Moshabane to recreate something close to 2 seasons ago, because there's not a volume goal scorer up top like in the 9 spot, so they are going to have to generate a lot of goals from the wing. I think having some genuine strikers like can unlock them. My concern about this team, the way that it's constructed, is that like Eric Calvillo is now in like entering his 4th season with El Paso Locomotive, and his best stretch for this team was under John Hutchinson playing as an 8, like the furthest forward midfielder in a 3. And ever since the change, when he's had to play a lot in a 2, he's been a worse version of himself because he's a really good striker of the ball, a really good passer of the ball, and a really like forward-thinking player that has had to do a lot of defending, like, and a lot of tracking back and I just like, I don't know that a double, like this sort of double pivot of Calvillo Coronado is my favorite version of like what they could have. So that's where the concerns start. I think that the other concern is just with center back depth. I think that's like my biggest concern is just like what happens if one of those guys gets hurt. You play with a back 3 and you only have 4 senior center backs. Kenneth Hoban as like the depth option, he is 15 years old. Like he is in high school. So I just like there's gotta be some other option. And then I I know that we joke that it's like doom and gloom for Locomotive, and I have like maybe larger concerns just about like the organization. But the reality for this club is that in the brightest spot of the season last year, under Wilmer Cabrera, they had 3 games where they scored more than 1 goal. And across the entire season, they did not score 3 goals in 1 game at all. They didn't do it once. So like this is mentality wise, like this team has to figure out a way, like, because there are players who genuinely are coming off like career worst seasons that now have to like be able to play with confidence. And we have to acknowledge that like even at its best, it was like solid, but far from anything like exciting. And this team is just going to have to score more goals, like if they want to be in the playoff conversation.
I mean, if we're the front office, if we are the strikers, we are the goal scorers here, right? They got to do something. They got to put the ball into the back of the net. If it's not working, change it. As one guy said, adapt or die.
I think if Moreno and Moshabane are genuinely playing on the wings, they have a much better chance than whatever it was we tried to do with them last year. So if it is a front 3 and they're on the wings, I think that they have a better chance of reproducing that form. But yeah, it didn't click necessarily in an attacking sense at the end of last year. So hopefully they're building something a little more serious. That being said, they did lose 2-1 to San Antonio. So I'm hoping, and their best spell of the game was like after San Antonio starters came off. So anyways, I'm hoping for the best, but we'll see.
But they didn't tweet about it. It's fine. It didn't happen.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts about El Paso before we move on? No, we are good. All right. Finally, Monterey Bay FC, no union, none of that going on here. Where besides the union, who do we gain? Who do we lose, John?
Traeger out. Christian Valesky gone as well. Looking at the list, Walmer Martinez gone to AV Alta. Kai Green is over in Oakland. Anthony Siaha is at his second stop of the winter now by joining Hartford. Carlos Herrera moved to Detroit, and so did Maury Donor. The additions are kind of wild. Lots of names that you will not know. In terms of familiar faces, Miles Lyons, going to be good. Maele Malonga coming in from Chattanooga, and then former League One Young Player of the Year, Ethan Bryant. Pick your poison in terms of the rest of the group. Lots of upside with Nico Gordon, who's going to captain the team from Central Defense. Hearing good things about Elijah Paul and Adam Larson up top. It's a kind of a mystery box overall. Like, this team is looking at signing, I think, a dozen or 13 new players. A lot of them don't have a ton of USL experience. If Jordan Stewart can get them going, could be interesting. But yeah, lots of fresh faces here.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about with Monterey Bay. And there was some kind of discussion with us that kind of got into our mentions of just like, you know, pay attention to what this team is doing, because in the end, there is a lot of names that we don't know, right? And as much as we would love to be scouting every single league around the world and be experts on all these teams, usually we don't really know until we see it, right? But Ryan, this is a team that was outspent by at least one, possibly two League One teams last year.
I think that's a conservative estimate, but yeah.
It certainly is. Is this team, we've mentioned Moneyball a lot. We kind of do the whole thing. Is there a Moneyball approach here? Is there a Tampa Bay Rays approach here of they see something in these guys for cheaper than everybody else and get more wins than everybody else?
Yeah, I feel like that's the optimistic way to kind of approach this team. But from like our personal rankings, from the fan rankings, just having so much of the mystery box that we have right now, is just like they can only go based off of what we most recently saw from this team when you have so many question marks over some of these players. And that was a Monterey Bay team that finished the final 15 games of last season with one win. They were shut out 8 times, and including 6 consecutive games, a Lord of the Rings runtime without scoring a goal in that time. And that's what we have to go off of. But one of the things is that you can just kind of wipe the slate clean from last year. And like you said, Kaylor, like try and find that kind of Moneyball approach to who we've brought in all these guys. It's a mystery box. Let's just kind of see what happens. You open the year with San Antonio, Oakland, and Orange County. Those are 2 teams you're going to be in direct competition with for the playoff bubble, and hosting Oakland for that first home opener it should be favorable, knowing what Oakland has now lost to this point. So it's really kind of tough to make a judgment, and I think the rankings the fans and us have given to them is probably I don't want to say fair, but it's the only place we can put them for now.
Phil, well, kind of remind me, was it last year or 2 years ago that they just, anytime they put the ball on target, they just scored, but they like never put it on target? Which year was that?
That was the very beginning of last season, right? Where they just like every single thing, like their conversion rate was just like off the charts. It basically, I mean, it put them in a spot where they started the season like insane. And it was like
6 unbeaten in their first 7.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So it will probably take something statistically similar to that, like some sort of anomaly for another start like that. I will say, like, the Adam Larson positivity, I think, like, of attackers who have come from like leagues abroad and especially in Europe, he probably does have one of the best goal returns, like, of a striker that we've seen like come from Europe into the league, even if it was in the whatever Finnish second division or whatever, or Swedish second division, I think. No, Finnish. No, Finnish first division.
You got
okay,
it. Finnish first, yeah.
Finnish first division. His one season in the Finnish second division was insane. He had like 12 goals in 13 games or something like that.
Yeah.
So I would say, like, maybe the positivity, there is something there because he has a decent goal return. When we're used to seeing players join from Europe who it's like they've not played in several years. So I just think, like, that being said, it feels very pieced together. Like, there's only so many holdovers from last year, and it just feels like too patchwork for me to have any confidence that they're going to be off the bottom. But yeah, I mean, who knows? They could score their first like 20 shots on target like they did last year.
John, one of the names on here is Nico Gordon, who, as was mentioned in the chat, was kind of captaining the team. He's still eligible for Young Player of the Year. And I think he is going to be a serious contender for it. I think he has all the talent in the world. He was a bright young spot for a Birmingham City team before he eventually gets a loan out to Austin and then a move to Austin. And now with Monterey Bay, I think he has the chance to be really, really good in this league. For the rest of the team, you look at guys like Larson, who seem like they're going to have good return. You see guys like Dixon, who have done it, and they did it recently for Monterey Bay. And then there's a lot of question marks. Obviously, this is a lot of players coming from abroad, so we don't really know them. But what's your best case scenario for this team?
Well, I mean, even looking at this team today versus Oakland post Rodriguez move, I don't know if I've got Monterey in the basement anymore, frankly. I think for this team to succeed and potentially get the 8 seed, which, let's be realistic, probably feels like their ceiling, I think Gordon is going to have to step up and instantly kind of do the Pupmar boy, come into the league as a young player and be at an all-league level. I think Carlos Guzman needs to stay healthy. He's somebody who, frankly, was kind of in my mental all-league conversation last year. I thought he was fantastic, splitting time between left back and center back. If those two keep it up, and if they get good goalkeeping from either Sam Gomez or Nico Campuzano, which is far from a guarantee, but they need all of that to come good. Honestly, the front line is exciting. You look at Malongo coming in from the left and Dixon from the right. Those are two players that have constantly scored goals in the USL doing that exact thing. Can Larson be the guy, or is it Elijah Paul, or is it a Luther Archmed finally getting healthy? I don't know, but they've got 3 players who could realistically be the striker. The midfield feels to me like the area that I just have a hard time selling it. It's a lot of players that could be a piece in a good team. And then when you're putting any 3 of them as a unit, it looks like it's a League One midfield in terms of the quality. That's not to say that someone like Moby Fair isn't a very good USL player overall, or Bryant has solid distribution skills, or Xavi Nalati isn't going to go on to be a great piece. Right now in 2025, I have a hard time buying in. But yeah, I mean, Monterey, as negative as I've been, I'm seeing the vision in a way that these other clubs that we're talking about as not being playoff teams don't feel like they had that same level of intentionality.
Ryan, you had some final thoughts for Monterey Bay.
Yeah, I guess one match to kind of schedule or circle on the schedule is actually on Star Wars Day, May 4th. We actually have Monterey Bay hosting the Miami FC, and I'll do the bold take that one of those clubs in that match will not be at the bottom of their respective conference entering that game. And then the other one is just more of a shout out for kit season, but I do like the new kits that they've at least released for this upcoming season. And I know it's been traditional that the darker blue has been the home kit, but I always thought the lighter, kind of more that sea foam color that's the same color of the logo should be the actual home kit. But yeah, I like both.
What is it? What's their thing? It's like something in kelp.
Crisp and
they
kelp,
do-
man. Crisp and
Crisp
kelp.
and kelp. I love everything about that. It's so goofy. Any other thoughts about Monterey Bay?
Remember when they started posting my playoff odds with a sponsorship from a local pizzeria at the end of last season? That ruled.
That's
Oh my-
amazing.
Just lower and lower every week. You love to see it.
Damn, you know that the USL show has run long when we're running into Orange and Black Soccer Cast. Like,
Yeah.
I know, I can't even guest on that show because it's past my bedtime, and here we are.
Sorry, guys. Any final USL thoughts?
Gosh, no.
Next week is League One preview. So for all you League One
There you
sickos,
go.
it's coming.
Possibilities. That rules.
So good. All right. Yeah, I think League One next week. The USL season starts next week. The USL men's seasons anyway. The Super League's going strong, which there were some bangers, but we don't have enough time for that. So, final thoughts for the night, Phil.
Last Thursday, because my mom was unexpectedly in town, my wife bought herself her birthday gift of we went and saw Justin Timberlake in Detroit, and at Little Caesars, which amazing arena, and I'm trying to get back there for some hockey and basketball in the near term future because it is an awesome arena. And I gotta say, like, I'm not a stan like my wife is of Justin Timberlake, but guy puts on a hell of a show. Like even to this day. So
he's an amazing singer.
Yeah, it was fantastic, and like the way I don't know, pieces of the stage were flying into the air, like and were being projected on whatever. It was a lot of nonsense. So it was tons of fun. And he has a whole band with like horns, guitar, drums, like the whole nine. So the arrangements on the songs are totally different than what you'd expect. So yeah, that's I don't know. It's I know he's not like, cool anymore, but damn, it was a good show.
Didn't Timberlake have like a mini comeback after the whole like world tour thing?
That was like 6 months ago, wasn't it? Like that feels really recent.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago. And then he went on the tour, and then he had to like appear in court. All this stuff got dropped, but then he also got sick, and so this is actually a reschedule of his tour dates from like because he got bronchitis like last year and like had to cancel some dates. So yeah. But hell of a show.
Love that. Ryan?
Yeah, so Paradise episode 7 for the first season was quite good when I saw that earlier. I mean, like edge of my seat, just kind of watching.
It's maybe going to be the best episode of TV I see all year. Like, that's just amazing stuff.
Yeah, so if you're not watching Paradise, go check it out because the 7th episode of the season was certainly worth it.
President James Marsden gives a speech that brought me to tears, man. It's so good.
John?
Yeah, I have been so deep in the writing weeds, you have no idea. We are at the editing stage of the big season preview, which with graphics in is 120 pages long on the Google Doc. Yeah, so I've now moved on to the League One preview, which will be a hell of a lot shorter. But yeah, I'm getting through it, and that's just life these days.
Please subscribe to Backhill for this all to be worth it.
Yeah, honestly, like I think, not to toot my own horn, I think the previews are in-depth and good. They deal with every team in equal detail, which I think is important for this league. So, hey, go check that out. And we're doing amazing MLS coverage as well, if you're into that.
It's also like pretty cheap. Just do it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I really don't have that much. This week was like really chaotic and like a lot, so much so that like nothing happened, if that makes any sense. Like I didn't do anything because my life was so busy. It's like the worst yogiism you've ever heard.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is that. Next week will be League One previews, and then we are into the USL season. There's a lot that we didn't get to this week. Again, you know your club better than we do. So support your local content creators and show them all the love because you have opinions and they'll know that team just as well as you do, if not even better. So thank you so much for watching tonight. Thank you so much for following along. Even though it was an hour, 50 minutes long, we do appreciate you. And here's Alan's voice.
Thank you for watching another episode of the USL Show.
The USL Show is now proudly part of the Protagonist podcast family. Please go to protagonistsoccer.com to check out more work. Thanks for stopping by. We'll see everyone again next time.